It's my pleasure now to welcome on former West Coast, Sydney and Richmond AFL footballer and the founder of the Mr. Anxiety Project, Mitch Morton. Mitch, how you doing today?
I'm good, mate. I'm good. I'm in a precarious situation at the moment because I'm 40 minutes away from finding out whether I'm going to be in lockdown for an extended period of time or whether I can leave my house tomorrow. So this is going to be an interesting podcast, doing this while the press conference is on in the background.
Yeah, the tail end of this, we might be able to tell just from the visuals or the length of the answers what WA has decided to do. But hopefully we get good news. I know being from Victoria, we've been through, I don't want to say hell and back, but we've been through so many of them. You sort of just, that's how I actually, when I think back, I'm like, I don't reference months or dates. I just go, oh, yeah, it was just after the second lockdown, which is kind of sad, but unfortunately it's a reality we have right now. But hopefully everything goes well for you guys in WA and everywhere else in Australia. Before we get into Mr. Anxiety and all the incredible work that you do in that space, let's touch on both a young Mitch Morton and your football career. So you grew up in a small country town in Western Australia called Lake Grace. Talk about your childhood.
Yeah, so I consider myself very, very fortunate to have grown up in the setting that I did. So I actually spent the first 8 years of my life in a town called Newdigate, which is 52 kilometres dead straight. And when I say dead straight, there is not one single turn down the road from Lake Grace. Yeah, down the road from Lake Grace. I think in the 60s and 70s, they used to have, unofficial competitions who could do that 52 kilometres the fastest in their cars. But thankfully, they don't do that anymore. But I grew up in a wheat and sheep farming community called Newdigate. There are only, I don't know the population statistics off the top of my head, but I imagine Newdigate is a town of a few hundred people. So there's only 6 or 7 streets in the town. It's quite a small town. Both of my parents grew up on farms in that town in the 60s and 70s. They went off to Perth and then moved back to the bush when I was born. So I lived in Newdigate until I was 8, and then we moved up the road 52 k's to Lake Grace, which, both of those towns are just phenomenal places to grow up. My father was still is a livestock agent, so he sells sheep. Yeah, in a little way that, in the way that people act as agents for people to sell houses, my father acts as an agent for people to sell sheep. So he's been doing that for 30 odd years. And that was the job he had in Newdigate and Lake Grace. So I guess we grew up in the town, but I guess I've been exposed to what rural communities are really about through my dad's work. We'd go out in the school holidays and I'd help him draft sheep and stuff like that. So I have a pretty good idea of, how a farm runs, even though I was a town boy, as they call us. Lucky enough to live, very, very close to both of the primary schools that I went to. And so, we kind of chucked the backpack on in the morning and off we went to primary school. And then in the afternoon, we'd come home, throw the backpack on the floor and then have afternoon tea and then straight back out the door.
Yeah.
And then kind of, that'd be it. Mum wouldn't see us until it was dark. The thing that I say about growing up in a place like that is you have to make your own fun. So I consider myself lucky to have been in an environment like that with kind of, like I said, throw the backpack down and then just get up to all sorts of mischief. Most of the time that'd be playing sport and doing stuff like that, riding motorbikes and building cubby houses and stuff like that. But we did get up to a little bit of mischief, I have to admit. And then when I was 12, I was nearly 13. I think I just turned 13. I went to boarding school in Perth. So that was a fantastic experience. My parents dropped me off at Hale School. Everyone was all worried about how I was going to go off on my own, but I couldn't wait to see the back of them. Yeah. I love my parents, but I was just so keen to go to boarding school. I loved it. So it was just, for me, it was like being around 30 or 40 of my best friends all the time.
Yeah.
So, you finish school and same sort of thing, off out the door, you'd go after afternoon tea and, playing sport and doing all sorts of stuff. So very lucky to have gone to boarding school as well. And, obviously very privileged to go to a private school. My dad worked really hard to make that happen. And I was very lucky to do that. And then from schooling, I was lucky enough to get drafted into the AFL. So I worked pretty hard as a kid to establish myself as a pretty decent footballer. I was probably one of the better kids my age. And then, straight from year 12, I finished my last exam on a Thursday at 4 p.m. and I was at training at 6:30 the next morning. So I missed out on all the pleasantries and the fun of schoolies and stuff like that. I was straight into it. So I guess that was my experience from being a child all the way through to starting playing professional sport.
Yeah. I think one thing that's important to recognize is Lake Grace is kind of a little bit of a footballing factory. For a small country town in sort of the middle of WA, it's produced, both yourself, your brother, your two brothers who played in the AFL, and then also, I believe, Nat Fyfe and Liam Baker.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So before that, there was Mark Bairstow and Clayton Gardner. So they played in the 90s. Mark Bairstow was captain of Geelong and lost a couple of grand finals to the West Coast Eagles. So I'm sure WA people might know his name if they've been an Eagles fan that long. Yeah. He, I guess Lake Grace was a very unique place in the 1990s. I remember running into because we won a couple of grand finals in the football, the seniors and the juniors, and the town was kind of just buzzing, in that late 90s. It was a fantastic place to grow up. And I ran into a gentleman who was in Lake Grace for a couple of years in the late 90s at a funeral in Bunbury. And he said, like, he's lived in a lot of country towns, but none were like Lake Grace in the 90s. He said something magical happened. We had this great mix of people from Lake Grace and then people coming back to play football. They had 8 or 10 people coming back from the city to play football. And it was just a great, I can't explain it. This town was just buzzing, this country town. It was probably, the end of that era of country towns having an influx of people, rather now the kind of farms are getting bigger and there's less people on them and there's people kind of leaving the area. But it was just, I guess, the last of those years where country towns were growing, and it was just such an awesome place to grow up. And so there was this real culture of sport. And I guess we were a product of that. And so has been Nat Fyfe, who was my next door neighbour. So we grew up next door to each other. And obviously Liam Baker as well.
Yeah. No, it's incredibly impressive. I think I just mentioned your two brothers there, Kale and Jared, who played in the AFL, but your dad also played in the Waffle for a number of years. So two things on that. How competitive was, backyard footy growing up for you as kids? And do you and your family sort of realize how special that is, that, all three children managed to play in the AFL? Something that, if I look at my three brothers, we can't even spell AFL. So the fact that all three of you managed to play in the AFL is honestly incredible.
It's one of those things, I guess, playing professional sport. And I've actually just started reading a book called The Molecule of More, about dopamine and how we always want more. And I think once you get drafted into a system like the AFL, it's like anything in life that you work really hard for. From the outside, it looks like, bang, you get drafted, but it's actually a process of years and years of work. And then you get into the system, and then it takes you a year to get a game, and then you get a game, and there's some other people that you've kind of been drafted with or you were compared to as a kid, and they've played 20 games. And you're always kind of looking for more. There's never really a moment where you're kind of like
satisfied.
Or for us, where there's never really a moment where we're kind of like all in the team, because we're kind of all fringe players, I guess, mostly. We're all in the team, and it was kind of happy-go-lucky and all signed up on 4-year contracts. And, football was kind of stressful, I guess, for our family. And being the eldest and going through, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but going through what I went through with anxiety, that was very, very hard on my family. And there were never really any moments where I was at peace. It was always a battle for me. And that was really taxing on my family, not just my parents, but my brothers as well, because they essentially lost a big brother.
Yeah.
And that's difficult. So I'd been their big brother, as, we all know how that kind of, I guess, works in life as a kid, you kind of look up to your brother and they're your kind of rock. And then I guess my mental health issues made that difficult and kind of took me out of that equation where they had me to kind of rely on and turn to. So it was hard. It was a pretty challenging period for my family. So I guess, we're proud of what we achieved. And, Kale and myself were super competitive as kids, playing footy all day, every day.
Yeah.
But Jared actually wanted to be a mechanic, and he was right into cars and motorbikes. So he was often down at the local mechanic shop, Tyre Power, in Lake Grace, which was run by one of our neighbours. We had Nat Fife on one side, and then we had another house, and then we had a mechanic. And Jared was always with him learning how to, fix cars and motorbikes and stuff like that. So it wasn't until he was 18 or 19 he started to take footy pretty seriously and got drafted. So,
which is kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, it's a good effort. And
yeah,
it's a good effort. Jared's probably a better athlete than Kale and I. He's
yeah.
probably naturally a better athlete. We might have had a little bit more skill when it came to football. He might argue that, I'm not sure, but
yeah,
he definitely was probably a better athlete. So he definitely used that to his advantage. But in terms of whether we actually, sit back and enjoy, I guess it's one of those things as you get older, you appreciate how hard it was to do. So I guess as we get older, we'll probably reflect on it a bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it is important to touch on your career specifically. As we mentioned at the top, you played for both West Coast, Sydney and Richmond. Now that you are removed from it, and it has been a couple of years now, what was the biggest thing that you sort of took away from your career when you looked at it from a whole?
I think that's a good question. I think I learned a lot. I've always been fascinated by how it's not successful. Successful is a funny word for it. I love seeing people who are really good at what they do and are in the groove and they're experts. I've seen it with my father, with what he does for work. He's been doing it for 35 years. And I guess I've seen it with my mother to an extent, the way that she kind of runs the family behind the scenes. And, certainly runs, my father's, she does the bookkeeping and helps, does the housework and cooks and helps around and does all these little things for the business and for the community where they live now in Beverly. And I guess I've always really appreciated seeing people in flow. I guess you call it flow. People in America call it flow, when you get into that state where you have the skills and you're being challenged and you kind of just flow. And I never got into that myself playing football. There might have been a brief period in 2009 where I probably nearly touched on it, but not for an extended period. So I used to really enjoy seeing, Chris Judd at full flight at West Coast, and then seeing Richo, running up and down the wing on the MCG when he played that year on the wing, and at Sydney seeing Adam Goods, do his thing and stuff like that. So yeah. I've always enjoyed seeing those people. So the things that I remember the most are, I guess, the things I took away and what I learned from those kind of superstars of the game. Not because they were special people and stuff like that, but it's just enjoyable to watch someone who's in their element like that.
Yeah, 100%.
And I've always aspired to do something in my life where I can get into that kind of element. And I think to do that, this might be a little bit of a unpopular thing to say. I don't believe that we have the genes and the natural born characters to go and do anything in life and be that good at it. I think life's about kind of working out what you're good at and what you're suited to.
I 100% would agree with that.
And then you can get into that flow. I didn't see too many footballers come in my time who weren't, already have that super athletic ability and kind of be able to read the game, that blossomed. No one really was able to go on to great things that didn't already have it in them. Now that might be a little bit unpopular, but so I guess my life since football, I've always had that in the back of my mind. When I've been doing jobs since then, I think of Buddy, who I was lucky enough to know, Buddy Franklin, play my state 15s, 16s and 18s and that with him. I think about him and Adam Goods and those guys that are in that flow and what I learned from watching that. And I have tried to apply it to my life after football. And when I've been in a job that seems like it's really, really hard and it's not really suiting my skill set, I kind of pull the pin on it and people, I'll look for something else. And I think sometimes in life we try to stay in that for too long. We try to fight it, but really life's kind of about taking the path of least resistance and working out what seems like it's kind of natural for you. And yeah, you got to work hard. Like the last 2 years, you know, the research that I've done for this project, the Mr. Anxiety project, has just consumed my life. But I enjoy that, you know, like I enjoy reading and reading and reading. I enjoy spending 8 hours a day reading and finding like one bit of information in that 8 hours that I can use because I'm passionate about it and I'm passionate about mental health. Whereas, you know, some jobs I've had where I'm just hitting the phones, trying to book appointments with people, doing sales type of stuff, and the reward at the end of it is financial. That's never got me into that kind of state where I feel like I want to get good at it. I've never been prepared to put the effort into that. So that's what I took away the most. The players that were really, really good, they had the characteristics to be a really good player. They weren't, excuse my language, they weren't pushing shit uphill. Yeah. So I guess that's what I learned the most.
Yeah, I think it's really important to touch on what you sort of just mentioned there about the, you know, the whole doing a job for the financial side of things and, you know, not really wanting to strive or pushing yourself to strive. I feel like so many men, specifically in our sort of age demographic, are stuck in that. And, you know, as you get old, as you go from, say, you know, 18 into your early 20s, then your late 20s to 30s, getting out of that to sort of jump into something you're passionate about just becomes so much more difficult. And, you know, you come up with so many more excuses for, say, why you won't do it. And it really does make me sad, because I would classify myself as someone who's in that position. And, you know, talking about it, you know, sometimes I kind of, you know, sit there and look at myself and go like, well, fucking do something about it. But unfortunately, it's like sometimes finding that to push yourself to do it is just, it's so difficult.
You're spot on. It is. And it's difficult from a, I guess, philosophical perspective, because finding out what you really want in life and chasing in that, it's tough to figure that out and to find it and to be able to rationalize in your head. But then it's also tough from a practical perspective, because the older we get, generally the more responsibilities we have financially. So it's hard to go and make that shift. I mean, I look at what I've done in the last 2 years. I sold my car. I sold like a lot of my assets and my investments, you know, to fund what I've been doing. It's like cost me a lot financially. Mm-hmm. You know, if I had a family, I probably wouldn't be able to do it. It's been a really challenging time. And like, it's been, and it wasn't something that I planned on doing. And I think that's why I ended up pushing through with it, is because it kind of felt like I had to. Like once I found this kind of like passion, it was like, okay, I have to do this. So if people are kind of like searching for that thing and it's kind of like, it's a decision, it's like, I think you need to search a bit harder. Like you might be on the right track. But at some point when you kind of find what you feel like you really, really should be doing, like it's almost not a decision. It's kind of like, okay, I have to do this. So
it's a requirement.
And then the real issue that comes in is, I guess, that swallowing of pride. When you take that step back, and it's like, okay, I'm going to go and start in this industry that I've got no respect in, like at all. Like, and you've got to make that transition. And the thing is, and this is the thing I would like people to understand, in 2 or 3 years, you can go from knowing nothing about something to being one of the world's leading experts on it. If you narrow down that field of what you're actually trying to be an expert in to like one thing, like in 3 years, like, can I become an expert on mental health, like across the field? Probably not. But like for the specific, like one little niche that I have with anxiety, like I'm kind of making headways in doing that. And 2 weeks ago, I paid $100 to go and have a piece of brisket meat that was cooked by a guy in this like backyard warehouse. He's only been doing it for 4 years. And this guy that I follow on Instagram, he has like tens of thousands of followers, and he sells his events out in 60 seconds. And he's only been doing that for 4 years. So I've only been doing like the research that I've been doing on anxiety for 2.5 years. So my point is, you can get really, really good at something really quickly if you just like dedicate your time to it. So I know for a fact that he like has been kind of like smoking meats every single spare minute of his life for 4 years. And to give you an idea of what I do in my spare time, in the last 2 years, I spent $4,500 on books.
Wow.
So like I just read and read and read. And sometimes I read 2 books and it's a waste of time. But sometimes I find like a little thing in there that really changes my perspective on something. So my advice is keep searching, and one day you'll find something that really makes you go, no, I've got to do this. And then you'll just do it. Yeah,
that's incredible advice. Sticking on football, you won a premiership, which is ultimately something that every kid grows up in Australia, dreaming about. We're going to look at this from 2 angles though. So first off, take me through that experience. And especially from the point of view, whether you want to admit it or not, you were a very pivotal role in that premiership win.
It's a hard day for me to talk about, because on one hand, like I am so privileged and lucky to be even a part of it, to be, even on the Swans roster, and to come in and, people forget that I played 5 games for the Swans that year. They played 25. I played 5. So very, very, very lucky to come in and be part of that day. Even luckier to have one of the greatest players of all time handball me the ball twice, Adam Goods, so that I could kick 2 goals. Lucky to be selected, lucky to be there. It was such a fantastic experience. And on the other hand, I hadn't kept food down for 24 hours before the start of the game.
Yeah.
So I had 23 tickets to the game that went to family and friends. The day before, when I was due to catch up with everyone, I cancelled all the catch-ups in the afternoon and at night because I was just so anxious.
Yeah.
I didn't sleep at all. And, I slept horrifically for years and years and years. So when I say I didn't sleep at all, like sometimes I literally wouldn't sleep a minute. It was a tough experience physically and mentally to get through that day. I only played half of the game. So I spent huge amounts of time on the bench, and I wasn't putting my hand up to go on because I just had no energy. I was so out of it. The hours after the game, I was delirious. I just was having vomited up all my food. And the worst part about the vomiting so much before the game, it's actually not the food. It was the Powerade that I couldn't keep down. Like I couldn't get electrolytes and water into my body. Everything would come up. And so I just had no energy. So like by the last quarter, I was just completely out of it. And I sat the last 11 or 12 or 13 minutes on the bench, just watching. I was kind of like, okay, I'm done. Like, please don't put me back on. I was so out of it. Just watched it like a fan. It was, best seat in the house. I was on the bench. So
it
was
free as well.
Yeah, free and got paid a little bit for it too, as you do when you win. So it's such a bittersweet experience. And then that night was awesome fun celebrating and stuff like that. But, the next day, and then, 24 hours later, all my teammates were out at a bar, and I was literally in my bed with the doona pulled over my head, saying to my partner at the time, I can't go out. Because my anxiety was so bad that, it was awesome. And I felt relieved that I now had this kind of notch on my belt because I'd won an AFL grand final. But now this is the way that I used to think back then. But now when I went out, like people would be looking at me. I had this fear of what people thought of me. I was constantly worrying about what people thought. And that kind of thought came into my mind, and then I didn't want to go out. So my partner at the time was like, are you sick? Like, she was like, you have to go out. And I was like, I can't go out. I'm not going out. I just literally had the doona pulled over my head. I used to kind of do that pretty much every day. It was the one place in the world where I felt like there was no pressure on me. Mm-hmm. Like that moment before I would fall asleep was like the one time where I was like, I felt safe for some reason. And she was like, you have to go out. And she kind of like pretty much forced me to go out. And I'm glad I did. And I had a good week with my teammates. But like I said, it was a real, parallel between the achievement and how I was actually feeling mentally and physically. It was really challenging. And, that wasn't necessarily a state of mind that I was just in for that day. That I played a lot of my career like that. So it was really challenging.
Yeah, 100%. And that was sort of the second part of the question, because there was an article written by Caroline Wilson where you admitted to basically throwing up, 10 times before and during the game. And I think for me specifically, and for probably a lot of people, that was probably the moment where they realized sort of maybe how serious this was. And all I could think of is sort of, how could someone play football, not just like that on that particular day, but for, a long spanning career, because I'm guessing it's not something just appears overnight.
I'll tell you a story, and because I'm not dumb. I'm a deep thinker. My go-to in life when the pressure turns right up is to think about things, So I overthink, if anything. And I know there's people out there that look at what I'm doing with Mr. Anxiety. I know there would be, who know nothing about mental health and kind of look at it as like, oh, that kid was a really, really talented junior footballer. He just doesn't like working hard, or he, it's his excuse. I'll tell you a story. Well, this isn't a story. This used to happen a lot, but I'll break it down to one day. I woke up one day. It was just a normal day for me when I was doing pre-season at the Richmond Tigers. We would train out at Monash University, and their playing fields out at Monash. And I woke up and I tried to eat Weet-Bix, and I struggled to get it down. So I ate about half of it. I got in the car and I was driving out there, and it's hard to explain the feeling in my stomach, but I used to describe it as if I'd drunk a cup of acid that would just sit in my stomach. And until I vomited it up, I just felt so sick. Mm. And I was about to vomit in the car on the freeway. So I ducked off at this exit. I don't remember the name of it, and vomited for ages. And then I got to the ground, and I always used to hide it. I never used to let anybody see what was actually happening. And which is one of the worst things about anxiety, and why they call it high functioning, because the first thing you do is hide it from people and try to pretend that you're okay. Yeah. And I got to the ground. I used to park up one end and have to walk across like 3 or 4 playing fields. It was a very long walk. And I got there, and I used to try to do that walk on my own, because oftentimes I'd have to stop and vomit again. And this time, a couple of the senior players were like parked right next to me. So I can't remember who it was. And I started walking, and then I needed to vomit like halfway. And I was like, what do I do? And where we trained, there were toilets kind of like down that end. And we were halfway, and I was like, I don't know how I'm going to get out of this. Like, I'm about to vomit. So I kind of like ducked off up the thing, and they were like, where are you going? I said, I can't remember what I made up. It didn't make any sense, because the toilets where I would have needed to go to the toilet were down kind of where we trained. And I vomited again, and we started the session, and then we were kind of like halfway through it, and one of the coaches kind of like pulled me aside and had a crack at me for not putting in enough effort. And I promise you, I was giving every single ounce of effort that I had in my body, for every minute that I trained my entire career. But from the outside, that's what it looked like. I had no energy. And I never stood up for myself, and I never really said, look, this is what I'm going through, because I always thought that it would get better. I always thought it was just about to get better. So I look back, and I had anxiety for 15 years. Well, why didn't I stop after 3 years and fix it? Well, it's because I always thought it was going to get better. And that's the issue with people that struggle with this stuff. They always think that it's going to get better. It's going to get better. But the reality is, unless you kind of step back, it doesn't get better. You need to put like time into it, like really put time into it. So I guess that story in a way kind of sums up what I went through, because that's what it looked from the outside. And I knew that's what it looked. I knew that that's what they thought. Yeah. But I never kind of went, hey, like I vomit every day, because like, I don't know, I'm kind of someone that kind of just pushes through stuff. Kind of like, I grew up in the bush, like that's what you do. And I never really, but that ate away at me even more, because I knew that that's what they thought. but I tried and tried and tried, and there was never really anything that I could do about it as hard as I tried.
Yeah. Did you ever think about, sort of, well, how often did you say think about giving up football? I can only imagine you would have had these conversations in these scenarios where you're like, how is this worth it?
It's a funny thing because I've worked my whole life to get there, and then to walk away from that, you don't know that there's going to be another opportunity present. And the thing is, when you're in that frame of mind, you're not thinking clearly. It's very hard to make good rational decisions when you have severe anxiety. Like, literally what anxiety does is takes the rational thinking part of your brain offline, and you go back to kind of the primitive brain. So in that sense, you're kind of like have the capabilities of rationalizing, making good decisions like a primate, because that's the brain that you're using, because you've taken that ability to actually be able to consciously work through things properly offline. So yeah, I look back and I'm like, why didn't I make certain decisions? But I can't blame myself. And should I have stopped and sorted it out? Yeah, absolutely. But like I said, I always thought it was going to get better. I always thought, oh, if I get through this week, it'll get better. And more so than having any regret about whether I should have stopped playing sport and fixed it, I didn't answer my phone for 8 years. So my friends just stopped calling me. They're the decisions that I regret. They're the reasons that I wish I had have pulled up earlier and gone, hey, I need to sort this out. I need to put time into it. Not the reasons for, employment and financial benefits, I guess, which is, what football is.
Yeah. I mean, before we jumped on today, when I was chatting to you, I explained to you about my experiences with it. And I ultimately gave away cricket, which was at a very non-competitive level, which kind of makes what I'm about to say even more ridiculous. But the fear of failure and my obsession with what other people thought about my cricket literally consumed not only my Saturday, but my entire week. And I always struggled with that, with that sick feeling in my stomach before I would go out to bat. And then even when I would go out to bat, almost like I was doing it for the first time. And it got to the point where, I absolutely love cricket, but I was like, I can't do this anymore. Like, this isn't something that, I'm obviously not getting paid for it. I'm supposed to be playing this at a fun level. And it honestly would consume my weeks, and it honestly ruined me. And that fear of failure and what people would say when you look at it from, taking a step back, it is honestly one of the most ridiculous things, but it was something that I just could never shake.
Yeah, well, I understand exactly what you're saying, and I understand it, as well as anyone, I think. And I used to just somehow, no matter how bad that feeling got, I would just push myself through it. Yeah. And the thing is that, yeah, it looks like I pushed through that anxiety to, achieve some stuff in the AFL, and I achieved a couple of things, and then pushed through it after AFL and got a uni degree and all these types of things. But what I did was that, every action has an equal and opposite reaction. That pushing through that, using up that energy to push through that, took away all the energy I had to put time into relationships, friendships. And so, yeah, I pushed through all that stuff, but I sacrificed this whole other aspect of my life to do it. And the older you get, you realize that this stuff is more important than that stuff, because, these are the group of people that are going to be there for you for your whole life. Yeah. And that's what life's about, spending it with those people. And when I achieved things over here, slowly as I got older, there was less people in this group over here to enjoy it with anyway. So, in the end, if you're not going to share things with your family and friends, what's the point? So it's disappointing, but I think the other thing to note is that feeling, it doesn't happen overnight, does it? It kind of comes on.
Absolutely not.
And it takes a long time. And then all of a sudden, bang, we're in this position. But it's taken so long to get there that it's almost normal. And for me, that was normal to me. Like this vomit, I look back now and I'm like, how did I do it? But at the time, that was just normal. That was my life. That's all I knew. I started vomiting before football games when I was 14. So even by the time I got to playing AFL, I'd been doing it for 4 years, times 2 or 3 times a week during football season, and probably done it 120 times. So it was very normal to me. But looking back now, it's not normal.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is, I mean, I played enough footy to see people and played with people who did that same thing. And if we look at sort of where, you know, the understanding with is around anxiety and mental health now, that wasn't the case back then. So someone seeing you throwing up going, probably thinking, wow, like, is he really that shit scared? Or, and that's probably what other people were seeing it, like, you know, guys playing local footy going, if you're that, you know, paranoid about getting hurt or you shouldn't play, but that real lack of understanding probably did affect like so many people and cost so many people their enjoyment in a sport or their love for a sport, and ultimately, you know, force them sort of out of it.
Well, when I started doing it, I can remember the first time it happened. I actually live in Swanbourne in Perth, and I can actually nearly see Claremont Oval, which is where it happened for the first time. And I remember how embarrassed I was because my opponent was like, "Are you okay?" And then the first couple of years that it would happen, I would really try to fight it.
Yeah.
I'd try to fight it, but then it would happen out on the ground next to my opponent, and it would freak them out. Like every game I would vomit, and then after halftime, after I had oranges and some more water and that, I'd do it again.
Yeah.
So by the time I'd got to the AFL, I would just make sure I did it in the change rooms so that people wouldn't see it. And then I would try my best to do it again only at halftime. And that every now and then I'd end up doing it on the field just because I couldn't avoid it. But I'd try to hide it as much as I could. So that's kind of where my frame of mind was. It'd become normal and it was just about hiding it.
Admitting there's a problem and addressing the problem are two massive steps. But what you've done, I think, to me, is so much more impressive than both of those things. You went away and you've mentioned that, you know, you spent, you know, over $4,000 on books. You know, you spent 2 years of your life educating yourself, reading books, speaking to doctors and neuroscientists, basically to try and put an end to what you're experiencing and then also learn more about it. And as a result of that, you know, you founded the Mr. Anxiety Project. Talk about that journey. I know you've sort of touched on it a little bit already, but talk about that journey and both what the aim for the project is and what you want for it.
Well, I think, and it's funny when you hear people who are doing similar stuff to what I'm doing, and they say, "Oh, I never started out planning on doing that. I kind of just was doing it for myself." You're like, "Oh, righto," you know, because now, you know, the Mr. Anxiety Project, you know, is a mental health events business that I'm trying to, you know, grow because, you know, I want to get it to as many people as I can. But when I started, all I wanted was to not have anxiety. Mm-hmm. So after football finished, I just spiraled for years, 5 years, around and around in a circle, lived in 4 cities, had 7 or 8 jobs, 2 or 3 uni degrees, different partners, just like trying to find things outside of myself that would make me feel better. And then had some pretty rough moments in 2018. I won't go too much into them, but had a very serious, what do you want to call it, situation on drugs, which could have gone either way. Lost another partner and couldn't get a job, was back in Perth, couldn't get a job, couldn't even get a $25 an hour admin job. I was driving an Uber for $14 an hour. Yeah. My anxiety was so bad I couldn't drive the Uber long enough to pay for my bills. I had a home loan, car loan, credit card debt. I can't explain the pain I was in that 10 or 12 weeks. It was, I'll never experience anything like that in my life again. I promise you that, because I'll make sure I'll never get myself into a situation like that again, because it was years in the making. Mm-hmm. And I got so low at some point that my parents were so worried about me that I stopped contacting them, because I I didn't want to worry them anymore. And I didn't really have any friends at the time because I'd been living away and lost touch with everybody. And I was really low one day. I had no one to call. So I called my ex-partner who's from Finland. I don't know what time or it was over there, but I called her and broke down. I just broke down. And hearing in her voice, she was kind of like, oh, why are you calling me? She was nice enough about it, but I could just hear the tone in her voice was kind of, you're not my problem anymore. So why are you calling me? And that just crushed me. Like, whew, like losing jobs and investments and financial stuff and all that. It's like, yeah, it matters in life, but it doesn't matter. And it can't crush you like that can when something like that happens. And I got off the phone and I texted her and I said, I promise that, because, my anxiety had just ruined my whole life to this point, literally everything. Just slowly it infiltrated every different aspect of my life and just tore it apart. And I texted her and said, I promise that this relationship's the last thing that my anxiety is going to ruin. And I texted that, blocked her number so I wouldn't contact her. Mm-hmm. And then I called my mum and said, Mum, I'm going to have a couple of years off life. I'm going to get a dead-end job. I just finished a finance degree and I'm putting that all on hold. I'm going to get a dead-end job and I'm going to figure out what's wrong with me. I said, anxiety's been running my life for 15 years. What is it? What's happening to me? Like neurologically, physiologically, like what's actually like, I want to understand it like right at that level. So if it's going to keep ruining my life, at least I know what it is. And the next morning I got up and I went to Dimmicks and bought a book. And there's a funny story about that book, but I'll tell that another time because it goes for a while. But bought a book by a psychiatrist named Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, who's an anxiety trauma psychiatrist. And then from there, I just started reading and I just started researching. And one of the things that I noticed very early on, which was a huge thing for me, is that any treatment or any pathway or any opinion or philosophy that you see on mental health is a theory. It's a theory. Mm-hmm. We can't cut the brain open and look at what's wrong with someone who has depression or anxiety or OCD or PTSD or agoraphobia or bipolar. So they're theories, right? And once I started to understand that, and that there were kind of people that had theories that, and these people are in the medical community. I wasn't reading books that are written by QAnon or any of those people on Reddit. These were psychiatrists and psychologists and neuroscientists. And I started to read all their work, these people, and then get in touch with them and talk to them and discuss things with them. And I started to formulate my own kind of understanding from that of what anxiety is. And then I started to put together this, it's a model, but it's kind of a diagram of what it means to me. And actually being able to see it in like a diagraphical form was huge for me. It was huge because when I'm feeling anxious, or when I started to try to, fix the issue, I could kind of tell where I was in that cycle and that picture that I have. And then I could kind of like acknowledge it and get in there and stop it. And so I started to trial different activities and things with that kind of philosophy that I'd created in mind, and started to feel better. And then once I started to feel better, the first thing I noticed was that I had more energy. And then the second thing, I started to feel better and started to enjoy life more. And then the second thing that hit me was there's heaps of other people out there that feel like I felt. I was like, they need to hear this stuff, because when I had anxiety, I went to countless psychologists, psychiatrists, GPs. I went on and off meds 10 times, overdosed on them twice. I've been to like 8 or 10 psychs. I've been to seminars. I've read heaps of self-help books, done heaps of online courses, and kind of none of those things I did really touched on this kind of stuff that I just learned. So I was like, I want to share this with people. And I feel like I'm allowed to share it, because all I've done is gathered the information from neuroscientists and psychologists and psychiatrists and put it together, and I kind of explain their work in a way that's easy to understand.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm not rocking the boat, because this information's come from really reliable sources, and I just decided to start presenting it in a way that is easy for people to understand. And that's where I kind of came up with the idea for Mr. Anxiety. So started working on a mobile phone application, but they're just too expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, like I touched on before, you know, I'm the son of a livestock agent from the bush. I wasn't born with a trust fund. I don't have access to hundreds of thousands of dollars that I can just use to go and build an app to see if it works or not. So my parents have been fantastic and have supported me through this process, but I just don't have the resources to continue building something like that. So then I thought, well, how can I translate this information to people? So I started doing Instagram, and then now I run the seminars, which is just awesome fun, being able to stand there and show people this information, which took me so long to find, and present it to them in a way that they can understand. I love it. It's my favorite thing in the world to do. So that's how Mr. Anxiety was kind of born. And the name Mr. Anxiety was actually the name for the software program that ran the app. Yeah. So people would get a message, and I wanted it to be from like someone, not just like a computer.
Yeah,
and
sure.
it would say, hey, your program for today is this from, and I came up with from Mr. Anxiety. So it kind of felt like a person, someone that was kind of like an authoritarian figure. Not that, you know, women, not that it couldn't have been called something else, but I'm a man, and so Mr. was natural.
Yeah.
And that's where the idea came for Mr. Anxiety. And then I stopped doing the app, but I'd already had the business registered and the Instagram. So I stuck with the name.
Yeah. I think the seminars and sort of what you touched on there about rocking the boat, a lot of people will actually take so much out of that. And I think people would have a hard time sort of going, you know, how dare you sort of, you know, preach this or tell me this, you know, the fact that, you know, you do have that lived experience backed up with, say, science, data, whatever you want to call it, does make it so much more powerful. And I feel like going into that public speaking seminar sort of a route is honestly such an effective way for you to go about it. How are you with like public speaking and that sort of thing? Because I know with, say, my anxiety, getting up in front of a room and speaking to, say, 100 people, regardless of the fact that I never shut up, that is absolute torture to me. And I don't think I could physically do that. Did you ever encounter any of that?
Well, the two last times that I publicly spoke before I did my first seminar, which was a couple of months ago, the second last time was in 2010. I think I spoke at the AFL induction camp for new draftees about some work that we were doing with Ladder, which is a youth homeless foundation. And at that induction camp, like, they kind of said, you know, Mitch Morton from Richmond. And I was literally mid-vomit in the toilet. So I had my hands on the bowl, like vomiting, because I was so nervous about going out. And I quickly got up, I washed my mouth and went out. And when I would publicly speak back then, I would just like go into like, I couldn't even feel my body. I'd just be numb and I would just be like shaking. I couldn't control it. And so I would just like fumble my way through it. I couldn't put together like a proper conversation. So that was the second last one. And the last one was in 2015. I played 8 or 10 games for Perth Football Club in the Waffle. I got injured. I played half the season, but I won the goal kicking. And I had to speak at the awards night. And the same thing happened. It's a traumatic experience when you're speaking in front of people and you are that nervous. So going into my first seminar, I knew that I'd be a little bit nervous, but the thing with my system that I have, I call it a system, this model of anxiety, like the way that you reprogram, or the way I've learned to reprogram, I won't get too technical, but we have our conscious mind, which is what we're using here to talk. And then we have our subconscious mind, which is our automatic mind. It runs everything behind the scenes, you know, oxygen levels, glucose levels, blood sugar levels, heart rate, digestion, all that, breathing, all that sort of stuff. Now, its job, and this is the medical definition, the job of the subconscious mind is to ensure that we react to situations the way that we're programmed. So what is that program? Well, that programming is based on our values, our experiences mostly, and our beliefs and everything we've basically been through in life before that moment. So when we get up to publicly speak, we will react to that situation the way that we're kind of programmed, which is based on, the fact that we know it's important and getting up is an important thing and we should care about what people think of our presentation. Mm-hmm. But then it's also what's also factored in is our experiences. So the only way to, and the experiences is kind of like 95% of it. So the only way to get more comfortable and to get better at public speaking is to public speak. So I knew that going into the first one. The real issue comes. So when you get that initial reaction to a situation like that, you feel nervous and you feel it in your stomach and that, you can actually publicly speak with that initial reaction. It's when we start to worry about it. Because when we start to worry about it, that initial reaction we have, which remember is based on our experiences mainly up until that point, that initial reaction is correct because it's based on our experiences. So like, however nervous you should be for public speaking is probably in line with how much experience you've had doing it.
Yeah.
But people that get anxiety have this overactive conscious mind. So what happens is when we go to do that public speaking and we get up there and we're nervous, we start rationalizing it. And we try to solve our issues with our conscious mind instead of just doing it.
Yeah.
So I knew going into my first one that that's how that system works. So what I do when I'm doing something that, well, when I was recovering from my anxiety that would make me nervous or I would get anxious about, I take the conscious element out of it. I just don't even think about it. I just do it. And was my first one going to be the best public speaking performance of my life? No. But I knew if I just did it and didn't worry about it and focused on, what I was feeling and used some of the activities that we do on Instagram, I knew that the next one would be better.
Yeah.
And then I knew it would just slowly get better. So what happens is if you worry about it while you're doing it and you make it any worse by worrying about it, you'll never get better at it. But if you go into it with the attitude, if I just do it and I don't worry about it and I kind of focus on, what I'm feeling, focus on that feeling in my stomach or focus on what my voice feels like when I talk and just get through it and just do my best, then, next time it'll be better. But it's very hard to do that because it's hard to actually stop worrying about it and focus on something like that. So it's a bit of a process, but you'd be surprised how quickly you can get good at it.
Yeah, 100%. A huge part of this is ultimately process based, and every single person is different, in the way that they respond or react to certain things. Talk about how you approach that when you do one of these talks, because ultimately you're trying to reach a large number of people who, aren't going to be necessarily the same as you in terms of all of that sort of stuff and how they process things. But how do you approach that and try and reach as many people without sort of, going, I did this, do this?
That's a really, really good, that's a great question. Really good
Thank
question.
you.
And I guess my favorite example of that is when Siddhartha Gautama, I think that's how you say it, who is the Buddha, when Buddha had his enlightenment and he realized, because he lived as a prince and then he lived as a poor person, and he realized that he wasn't happy with either. So he decided that the way to be happy was to just live in the middle and not get attached to things. So just live and don't get attached to people and places and objects and stuff like that. Just don't get attached. Just live and let good things come and let bad things go. And when he had that epiphany, people said, "Oh, what did you learn? Oh, tell us." And he said, "I can't tell you. You have to learn for yourself. I can show you," which is kind of to go away and meditate and sit with yourself and get used to things. So I've always kept that in the back of my mind, that I don't want to tell people how to beat anxiety. I show them what I've done. And we're slowly getting closer towards this vision that I have with the seminars that I run, where rather than it being about me, I'm simply putting it together and we have a host of experts from different fields. So psychiatry, psychology, counseling, neuroscience, somatic experiencing, yoga, mindfulness, meditation. and they all come together and we present all of this information to people. And just like I have that diagram, which makes sense to me, people have kind of a sheet that they can take notes on, and kind of throughout that seminar, they can create their own understanding of what it is. And they can pick parts of it, because for me, that's what it's about. I pick parts out of psychology. People think that I'm kind of like, I get messages on Instagram, are you anti-psychology? Because I tell people not to consciously work through things. In my seminar, I say, if you can consciously think something that makes you feel safe, then go for it. That's part of it. So I'm always looking for things that I can use from psychology, but then looking at things from, Eastern religion and mindfulness, and picking the bits that I like that make sense for me and turning that into something that I can use. And that's what I want people to do. That's where I want the seminar to go, where I present all of this information and they put it together themselves. So we're getting there, because it's hard for me to put together an event like that at the moment because of my limited resources, but we're slowly building it up. But we've added a mindfulness coach to the next one on Tuesday. But at the moment, the huge disclaimer that I say to people after I've presented what I've learned is, this makes sense to me. This works for me. I've gone from not playing football, I hadn't played it in 5 years, to loving it and playing football again. I've gone from not being able to get up and speak in front of people publicly to doing the seminars as my favorite day of the week. So I've been able to do that in a very short space of time by applying this model. So it's up to you to take my model and then turn it into something that works for you. It might exactly work for some people, but it might not. But it's up to them to take it and kind of add bits and subtract bits and work it all out. So that's why it's such a good question, because I don't want to tell people how to beat anxiety. And I don't think anyone is qualified to tell anyone how to beat any mental health issue. I think all we're here for, as people who are kind of trying to make a difference, is to offer up information. And then it's up to people to take that information and turn it into a solution for themselves.
Yeah, 100%. That's an incredible answer. You started a podcast recently called Mornings with Mr. Anxiety. To me, this is something that's raw, emotionally triggering, but ultimately really beautiful in the way you sort of, work through and describe not only your issues and your experiences with your anxiety going through, but also touching on exercises, stuff that you do, how you've come out of the other side. Talk about this side of the project, how beneficial it is for you personally, and then also seeing, people engage with what you're putting out each day and sort of, saying this helped, and that sort of thing.
I think the idea for the podcast is it allows me to actually elaborate on things. Instagram is a great forum for kind of like really quick, flashy grabs at stuff. And I find it very difficult to convey all the information that I want to pass on to people. So a podcast allows me to kind of go into more depth and explain things better. That's kind of the main reason that I want to do it. And the other thing is, like, people obviously have different preferentials for how they consume content. So some people like seeing pictures on Instagram, and some people like listening to podcasts. Some people like watching YouTube videos. Some people like TikTok. Some people like reading books. So there's all these different ways that people, consume knowledge. And I guess I'm trying to just evolve and offer that something different to some people who might want that start to their day. The reason I do a daily one, and it's just short and sharp, 15 minutes, is for people who may need to start their day like that. They may want to hear what I have to say during the day, and it's hard for them because they drive to the train station and then get on the train and then they're at work. Mm-hmm. But being able to kind of listen to that while they're driving and stuff like that, because we do an activity every day at the end of it. Yeah. And the idea is that activity they can use throughout the day. So that was kind of the main reason. I can explain that activity a bit more. So it's just another way of sharing. And for me, it's like super cathartic, being able to, like, I guess, share what I've learned. I think we have this, and one of the things that I talk about on the podcast is we've really changed the way that we live as a society. We used to, throughout history, for thousands and thousands of years, we would learn from mistakes and then pass that down through storytelling to other generations so that they wouldn't make the same mistakes and it would better our species. Well, now, thanks to the sheer level of unadulterated greed that we live in as a world in general, and our obsession with celebrities and stuff like that. We think now that life's about making mistakes and learning from them so that you can profit from them, so that you can personally profit from them. That's like, if we really drill down into why people do things now, they say, oh, that's all right, you'll learn from it so that you don't make that same mistake with the job, and then the next one you're better at and you earn more money and you're more successful. Like, that's essentially like the crux of where we've gone as a society. And it's very much against the way that we evolve. We evolve to share our knowledge with the next generation. And so for me, actually getting to like share what I've learned with other people that have anxiety is like the best part of what I do. Like, knowing that someone out there is feeling like I was 2.5 years ago, I kind of try to like create content that is for that person. So yeah, it's really fun for me to be able to share it in that way.
Yeah, 100%. I know this is probably just going to follow on from that. And you can't sort of really think, say, long term while we're still living in this, COVID affected world. But where do you think you can take this project to ensure that you are the most impactful in this space?
That's a good question. And at the moment, I guess I'm in a stage with it where it's about building skills. Like, I've done 5 talks. I have my 6th one. I can't read the TV from that far away. I don't know whether my 6th one's going ahead on Tuesday or not, which is really frustrating. But for me, I'm in a period where it's all about building skills. So building skills in learning how to share my content in a way that all the information that I've learned that resonates with people and they understand it. So I like, when I explain something, I like really going into depth, and I've found out that Instagram's not the place to do that.
Absolutely not.
So like, that's why I've gone towards the podcast, and I want to improve my skills in kind of like elaborating more on what I'm talking about. Mm-hmm. But the big one for me is my skills as a presenter. Like 6 presentations ago was that presentation I did when I won an award at Perth Football Club, and just bombed, and like was the worst experience for me that year. And then 7 presentations ago was when I was vomiting in the toilets. I stopped public speaking after that until I had to, which is when I won that award. I couldn't get out of it. I just stopped doing all public speaking. So 7 presentations ago, I was vomiting before. So I'm still learning. I'm still improving my skills at like presenting. But I guess my dream is to take, that seminar concept to America. Mm-hmm. And I think that they would like the whole concept, and there's lots of people over there, they really struggle with anxiety. It's a really high pressure environment. They have a lot of pressure on them to achieve in America. So, and let's be honest, like, if you have a product or service that you want to kind of roll out, and you have a population of 26 million people and you have a population of 400 million, like, well, of course you're going to go to the greater population, just because it's like more chance of succeeding. And all I want to do is create a business that I get to do for the rest of my life, I just want to run these seminars for the rest of my life. So obviously I want to get somewhere where there's enough population to be able to do that. And I don't know whether there is enough in Australia. I guess I'll find out in the next couple of years. At the moment I can't even run a seminar on the East Coast because of COVID. So it's really, really frustrating. But I'm just trying to build my skills, and I guess the long-term goal is hopefully to be able to run that, one-stop shop, I call it, style seminar, where we get the experts in and I'm kind of just putting it together. And I'd love to be able to do that all around the world. I guess that'd be cool.
Yeah, I think from an athlete point of view, the sports psych kind of a route is really starting to take off. And, I think most, especially in North America, with the main 4 codes there, most athletes will now happily admit that whether they have a sports psych on their roster for all year, or just certain points of time, it's getting to that point where the whole what would you say, like the whole stigma behind like an athlete's week or that sort of thing is completely almost gone. And so once again, lived experiences. I could see that being something that, you know, you'd be really successful in.
Yeah. And that's, I guess it's about, you know, like when you don't really think about it when you don't have your own business. You kind of like, you know, I've never had a business where I've had to worry about where the money's coming from and the revenue and putting food on the table. But when you do, you realize really quickly, you're like, I need to get to wherever I can, you know, get the biggest audience, because like I need it to survive. Because if it doesn't survive, then I've got to go back and get another job. And this is really rewarding and fulfilling for me. So I naturally want to do this as my job, and I'll do whatever I have to do to kind of like make that happen.
Yeah, 100%. Two more questions. Let me put you in a situation. You're standing up in front of a room full of people, a lot of those who you have a very large potential to make a significant impact into sort of how they feel in that moment and moving forward. Knowing what you went through and how that was probably the furthest thing from your mind at the point, how does that make you feel right now when I sort of put that in your mind?
Yeah, it's funny. I try to, because I used to watch so many TED Talks and listen to so many podcasts and read so many books and just kind of like consume as much information as I could, looking for something that was going to help me. And when I stand up and I realize that like I'm on the other side of it, where I was 2.5 years ago, that's a really nice feeling. And and I say to people all the time, I had someone message me once saying, what's the point? They were struggling and they were like, what's the point of it all? And I was like, the point is that you can recover from what you're going through, and then you can go and start something like I did. That's what I said to her. I was like, then you can go and start an Instagram account and go and like get followers and teach people what you learn. That's like, if you've got a mental health issue, like there's only going to be, the way that we live now is so far away from the way that we evolved. This is only going to get worse and worse. So everyone can go and do what I do. And there's still going to be enough people out there who want help. So I say to people, go and start, do what I'm doing. Go and find out what works for you, and then start an Instagram page and share it. It's awesome. Anyone can do it. It's super easy. So it's nice to be on that side of the fence, and, you know, anyone can do it in 2 years. Like seriously, it's hard work, but once you kind of care about something so much, it's just natural.
Yeah, 100%. Last one. In that article that we sort of referenced from Caroline Wilson back in 2013, you said that I don't think there's ever been a point in my life where I've been truly content, and that was, everyone has their challenges, and that was your challenge. You're 8 years removed from that, and obviously that 8 years has been an extensive journey. Would you, when I read that quote, would you say that you're still at that point, or have you been able to find that peace and that being, and found a way to become content?
Well, I think so. I was very lucky that when I was kind of 15, 16, just before I started to really struggle with anxiety when I was 17, I kind of got into that kind of flow state with my football and I guess my life. I was kind of like working hard at school and getting good grades, and sport. I was kind of going pretty well at sport and stuff like that. And I kind of was in the groove, and that's kind of like what I chase in terms of contentment, just being in that state where you're like working really hard, but you enjoy it and you're challenged, and it's kind of all just working. And I kind of felt like about 8 weeks ago, I was touching on it, and I'd done my first 3 talks, and I was about to book venues in Melbourne and Brisbane and Sydney and Adelaide to do my trip. And then I couldn't book them because of COVID. So I kind of feel like I've been just kind of like treading water for 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah.
And I feel like, because like I'm happy with everything that I'm doing at the moment, but I feel my most contented when I put up get an event up and I'm selling tickets and I'm excited about it.
Yeah.
And I'm getting ready to present and trying to organize speakers and doing the marketing for it. Like I really feel like that's what I am best suited to doing with my life. And I've only got to do that a couple of times.
Yeah.
So I got this kind of like taste of it, and then I was about to do it, and I was in touch with these event spaces and everyone on the East Coast, and I had flights, the times all ready to go to book and all that. And then COVID was popping up, and I kind of pulled out. So the last 6 or 8 weeks has been frustrating, and I haven't got back into that state, but I know that it's kind of like ready to go.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't say I'm content, but I'm happy with where I'm at, and I know that I'm like ready to go into that mode as soon as I'm able to, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, mate, when that time comes and you do come to Melbourne, I'm looking forward to going to hear you speak, and seeing how you can sort of grab an audience and, ultimately help them make changes. I just want to thank you for coming on today, being so open. I do have a lot of admiration for what you're doing in this space, and I'm really looking forward to seeing where you take it.
Thanks, mate. No, I really appreciate you having me on, and thank you for putting the effort in to do this stuff. I had a look at a few of the episodes that you've done before, and I'm going to have a listen to a couple of them, because there's some people on there that I used to follow. I think there was a cricketer, was it Crossway?
Adam Crossway, yeah.
Yeah, I used to watch him, and there's a couple of guys that, I'm looking forward to hearing what they have to say. So thanks for putting time into this sort of stuff. It's awesome. And, my favorite line that completely changed my life came from a book by a psychiatrist. And you never know, maybe that thing that is going to change someone else's life and start their spiral of recovery is going to be on one of your podcasts. So that's really, really cool. So thanks for putting the effort into making it.
No, I truly appreciate that. They're great words. So thank you very much for that, mate. And all the best with everything.
Cheers, mate.